All right. Oh, actually, I need to redo something very quickly. Okay, great. So, thank you everyone for taking their time. This is the training for the 2026 point in time count for Northwest Arkansas. This training is geared towards general community volunteers, although there's certainly a good bit of nuance in between and who's doing this training. There are some people whose names I recognize and have participated in pit counts in past years, and there are some people who are new. So this is mostly going to be this training is going to largely assume that this is all new content to folks. So let's go ahead and jump on in. And oh, I would just mention a couple things for housekeeping, especially as we are a small group. Really do feel free to ask questions just verbally, but also, especially with Danny here, feel free to use the chat box as well, and Danny will keep an eye on those and can interrupt as we need to. And let me see why someone's calling me and turn that off. All righty. Okay, so pick count 101. So we're just going to start off with some basic kind of definitions so we all know what we've signed up for. So what is a point in time count? It is an attempt to conduct a literal count of everyone experiencing homelessness on a specific point in time, and I want to talk about that in a minute, within the four counties of Northwest Arkansas. And those are, for our purposes, some people define things a little differently, Benton, Carroll, Madison, and Washington counties. So it's an attempt to conduct like a complete count or a census. The reality is we'll never get to that literal complete count, especially for the unsheltered folks for a variety of reasons that most are kind of obvious and we'll talk about as we go. And it's also important to keep in mind that the methodology that we use, and this flows from the federal government, it's focusing on a specific point in time. So it's a snapshot. So that has some advantages, but it also frankly has some disadvantages. Isn't going to affect what you all do, but just as background, it is its own form of undercount. If for those of us who work with homelessness, we understand there's a very cyclical nature to it for a lot of people. So a broader assessment of homelessness in our region or in our state or in our country would consider, not just the number of people on a specific date, but the number of people who experience homelessness over, say, the course of a year, and that number would be much higher. But it's a good standardized. I tend to encourage people to think about it as a good low end estimate. The timing is largely chosen by HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level. They mandate that each region in the country that receives funding for homeless services conduct a pick count during the last 10 days of January. They want it to be a winter count because that is for most regions of the country, that's when the consequences of homelessness can be most stark. A lot of my practice background was working with homeless folks in Phoenix, and summer was probably more deadly to unhoused folks than winter was, but kind of an anomaly as we're all bracing for the weather here now. We know that in most of the country, winter weather can be quite harsh and deadly. And again, as I've already talked about, think of it as a snapshot, a good but a low end estimate. Okay. Okay, so who is counted in the pick count? The definition we use comes directly from the U.S. Housing and Urban Development. And we're looking at people in two categories. And the next slide, I'll unpack those a little bit more. But we're looking for people who are sheltered in homeless shelters and also unsheltered. And one thing I'm going to note, and it'll start to become clear when we get to the next slide, the definition that HUD has us use across the country is also kind of narrow and kind of conservative. So it leads to another form of undercounting of the issue. So Again, as you kind of talk to people about it, and when we release the numbers in, probably May or so, keep that in mind. And I always kind of disclaim that when we do the annual reporting. Okay, so in the sheltered count, there are kind of three categories, and actually one of them on this list doesn't apply to us. Safe Haven is a homeless service model that we do not have here in Northwest Arkansas. There's not a lot of them left in the country, actually. Um, we do have certainly throughout our region, mostly in Washington and Benton counties, we have a handful of emergency shelters, and we have a few transitional shelters. So, and generally for these, there's not a lot, like people know where they're going to them, and so not a lot of assessment that has to occur there. The one caveat I'll mention, and usually this is something that agency staff who's partnering with us is involved with this, but I do want to highlight this one subgroup that we consider to be emergency shelter for individuals that are homeless, don't have a place of their own, and if they're placed in a hotel or motel with an agency or a church voucher. I mean, it doesn't need to be a voucher, but basically, if a nonprofit or faith-based community is putting an individual or a family up in a motel, that individual we will think of as homeless, and we will actually put them in the emergency shelter box. And as our questions on the interview form are well designed to help you figure those things out. By contrast, even though I didn't actually write it here on the right, if an individual or family is managing even ever so barely to keep themselves in a motel. Even, there are some very unfortunate motels in our communities that's really, housing of last resort. But if a family or an individual is keeping themselves in there by their own money, their family's helping them out some, we do not consider them as homeless for this purpose. It's helpful to talk about some other categories that are, oh, actually, and I'm jumping to, I apologize. I'm actually talking about the next slide. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's talk more about who is homeless, and then I'll continue to who is not. People that we will count as unsheltered homeless are people who live in a vehicle, car, truck, van, doesn't matter. We would also consider as homeless an individual who's living in an RV if they do not have utility hookups. And also, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but just to state it, that they don't have an actual home somewhere else. So if someone is recreating in an RV in the winter in Northwest Arkansas for some strange reason, God bless them, but we're not counting them. If an individual is sleeping in a park, in any type of outdoor space, even if they have a tent, even if they're in the woods and they've structured a lean-to or something like that, those are individuals that we're going to very easily think of as unsheltered, and we want to count them. We don't see a lot of this in our community, maybe more for the bigger urban areas, but certainly if someone is sleeping in an abandoned building, we would definitely want to count them, and we would think of them as unsheltered. Another contrast point, if someone were to be in their own house or apartment, it's not abandoned, but the utilities have been disconnected, we would not count them. That's certainly housing insecurity, not a good status, but we will not think of them as homeless. If people are sleeping in public buildings, that's again a little bit more of a bigger urban area, but sometimes we encounter it here. If there's a 24-hour laundromat, someone's sleeping in there, they can certainly be counted. If bigger communities with like big bus stations, things like that, anything like that, we would certainly count. Again, just the basic way to think about it is it's a place that's not meant for humans to be living and sleeping in. Continuing that same example, if someone is sleeping in a shed or a garage, someone's has their in-laws have said you can sleep in our shed till you get back on your feet. Those are people we should and would want to count because sheds are not meant for human habitation. Streets and woods and parking lots, all of those types of things, they'll all go in the unsheltered category. Any quick questions at this point on content here? Then I want to expand a little bit on the who we don't count, because there are some groups of people that certainly are experiencing very acute housing insecurity, but we don't count based on the federal model. So if people are in jails or hospitals or nursing homes or any type of drug treatment center, halfway house, even if they were homeless the day they walked in, and even if unfortunately they're likely to be homeless the day they leave, we are not allowed to count them as a homeless individual by this definition. So the focus, and I should have said it a little sooner, all of our questions are focused on this one kind of, I usually call it like this magic night. It's like, where did you sleep, or where were you? Because sometimes, people aren't sleeping. That's obviously not a requirement, but where were you on the night of Thursday, January 29th, going into Friday, January 30th. So this time next week. This is the biggest category of folks that we often encounter, and especially at some of the the folks we see it here in Washington and Benton County as well, but especially for some of the folks that are out in Madison and Carroll County doing some work at food programs and things like that. If someone is doubled up or couch surfing with family or friends, we do not count them as homes. So and very often it can be frustrating. Perhaps they were homeless just a few days ago. Again, we focus on this narrow specific dates to be consistent with this methodology. Okay. So your role in the point in time count. Let's start to go into this content. So, well, first off, let me say in terms of where do you go? Some of you very much know where you're going, especially like the people that we've been partnering with in Madison and Carroll counties. There are certainly some people that are, some teams that's like the Heart group that knows they're going to go to Springdale in the morning. There's some of those arrangements that we've made, but most of the volunteers are as of yet unassigned. Over the weekend, kind of somewhat assuming that I have electricity throughout the weekend, but I've got some decent battery backup. My basic weekend plan, besides playing in the snow, is mapping out volunteer assignments. And so by Monday, perhaps Tuesday, if the weather intervenes, I'll be between me and Danny, we'll be emailing all teams and saying, okay, these 5 people are going to go on Friday morning to the day shelter that Seven Hills runs in Fayetteville, and these 8 people are going to go to the Salvation Army shelter in the evening. One thing that's really important is we'll be drawing. I know some of you completed the volunteer survey. Some of you completed it in the past 24 hours. Some of you completed it, a month or so ago. We'll be making those assignments consistent with the availability you reported to us. So if anything has changed, if you could send an email to Danny or myself, and we'll factor that in. And then please do be on the lookout for those emails coming Monday or Tuesday. And hopefully not, but if your availability's changed, please let us know ASAP, so that we can modify plans. But by Monday, Tuesday of the week coming, folks will know where they're going. Danny's turned his box on. What's up?
I've had one or two people that have resubmitted. So maybe a week ago they submitted in the link, and then they resubmit. I always take the latest one and I delete the old one. So if your schedule's changed, if you can go ahead and resubmit in the link, I'll get that information on. I think we said Saturday or Sunday.
Perfect.
When
Yeah.
I'll include that.
Yes, absolutely. That works great. And the one other caveat in terms of, and I'm going to send out the assignments on Monday or Tuesday, assuming we'll be doing some counting of unsheltered folks and going like normally we go out to a lot of the camps in Fayetteville and Springdale and spend time on the streets. Although it's not looking like the weather that's coming this in the next 3 days is obviously wicked. There's going to be emergency winter overflow shelters throughout, certainly the larger communities in our region. Um, a week from now is looking like it's going to be not as nasty, but still pretty cold, and it might trigger some of the extreme weather response, which will mean the opening of some of the emergency shelters next weekend as well as this weekend. So Danny and Quinn and I are kind of like dual tracking. We're thinking about a plan B. So for those folks that I'm saying, I'm going to ask you to go out to camps with me and Danny or something like that. Know that if it ends up being very cold next week and the overflow shelters are working, I might pivot some of those teams and say, hey, instead of going to deserted camps in South Fayetteville, we're gonna flex volunteers over to Potter's House and Genesis Church and the places where they're doing the emergency weather sheltering. So just an early FYI, putting it on your radar screen. But okay, so we have two different forms if you're using the paper version, and I'll talk later about the paper versus electronic options. But there's two different paths. So we very much hope and prefer that most people will be comfortable taking the roughly 10 minutes, asking the number of, moderately to even sometimes pretty personal questions that make up our full interview. And I'll give an overview of what's in those items in the next slide or two. But for a variety of reasons, some people we cannot do a full interview. Some people just flat refuse. That's their choice. This is 100% voluntary. Some people maybe they're sleeping. We're going to try to match volunteers who are bilingual in English and Marshallese, Spanish and Marshallese in the areas with the highest Spanish and Marshallese speaking population. But sometimes language barrier can be an issue. There can be a variety of reasons that we can't get a full interview done. For that reason, we have an observation form. It's much less rich information. And I'll talk about that in a little greater detail. So just know that's an option. Okay. So the general interview, and from past years, I think we're probably running, I didn't look at the numbers, but about 60 or 70% of the people that we're counting, we're getting full, complete interviews on. So generally speaking, we're going to do one form per household. Our survey on the paper form is set up. It has space for 3 individuals. So if you're using the paper form and you have a family of 5 or 6, just use 2 forms, staple them together, make it clear that this is one household, and Danny and I will figure that out on our end. The electronic version is set up to take a household as large as 10. So in the time I've been doing this, I've not encountered a household larger than 10. If you happen to come across a household that's greater than 10 and you're using the electronic form, you could basically just kind of break them in two and go through it a couple of times. But I'd be surprised if that happens. I want to talk about household a little bit. So we're just going to largely focus on how did the people think of themselves? Do they think about themselves as a household that's sharing resources? Most logically and most commonly, it's a family unit, and that tends to speak for itself, and it's pretty clear. Just to state it, we have no interest in people's marital status. If a couple with or without children is married or unmarried, if they tell us they're a couple and they're a household, that's fine. We're not asking for anyone's marriage certificate or anything. Or we'll just treat them. It's the exact same option, spouse or partner. Sometimes, especially in some of the homeless encampments, there are people that will kind of think of themselves as a household. They're more just, they're buddies who've been watching each other back for several years, things like that. we'll just kind of follow their lead on that. Again, I might ask a little bit of, do you share resources? Do you really think of yourself as a household? Don't need, there's like an other box. They don't have to be romantic partners or anything. Again, largely follow the lead of the folks. The one thing I'll just note, every now and again, I get someone who's been like out to the Salvation Army shelter, and they'll try to put in one household all of the 8 guys that sleep in the same bunk room. That don't do that. Those are single people, that type of thing. I will mention though, thinking particularly about the 2 Salvation Army shelters, it's not uncommon that we maybe are interviewing people who are a male-female couple, and the man is sleeping in the men's dorm and the woman is sleeping in the women's dorm. If they think about themselves as a couple, I'd want to respect that, and we can easily complete them as one interview, as one household. We still want to count the 2 humans, but we can put them in one household. But ultimately, we can kind of work with that either way. So not the biggest issue. These are the topics that the full survey covers. I think at this point, I've probably sent out to everyone who's in this training the actual paper version of the survey and the link to the electronic version. So you should be able to start getting familiar with these specific questions. So I'm just going to do this at a little high level. First cluster of questions is kind of focused on eligibility. Back to that slide, those couple of slides I had on who is and who is not homeless by this particular definition. So just kind of like ruling out the people that are doubled up and sleeping, living with their sister for a while. There's also some other questions on like the nature of their homelessness, mostly how long they've been homeless, if they've been cyclically homeless. The main reason I wanted just to have for those of you who are new to this, to have it in your head, HUD tracks, and I think it's a very important thing to track. We've identified a subgroup of individuals that we call chronically homeless, and they're people who have been either homeless for over a year consecutively right now, or they've had a lot of cyclical homelessness over the past 3 years. So there's a few questions in there like, in the past 3 years, how many have you been homeless 4 or more times? In the past 3 years, have you been homeless totally 12 or more months? Things like that. And so even though my survey doesn't say, are you chronically homeless? Because people generally don't know that, the questions are there that'll let me and Danny on the back end identify those folks who are chronically homeless. And the other thing that feeds the definition of chronically homeless is also they need to have a disabling condition. So that leads to down here, we have a series of questions on disabling conditions. So they're really they're focused on how the person perceives themselves, so people don't have to have a doctor's note or formal diagnosis. It's basically, do you have a physical disability that significantly impacts your ability to, work or hold a job? Do you have a problem with substance use? Questions like that. I don't think that's exactly how they're worded, but it's basically like that. We ask people if they served in the U.S. military. If the answer is yes, there's another couple of follow-up questions. And this is one of and you should totally use whichever you prefer, but one of the many advantages of using the electronic version is we've designed it with like skip or display flow. So if someone says they are not a US veteran, we don't even see did you deploy to a combat zone? Do you use the VA healthcare system? We can just skip right over those. Whereas on the paper survey, you still should skip over them, but you have to see them. They kind of clutter and slow it down a little bit. We ask people, I think this isn't a HUD requirement, but I find it very important just thinking about local politics and things like that. We ask people when they last considered themselves to be housed, where that was, because there tends to be, and I saw it when I did this work in Phoenix, I certainly see it here, there tends to be this myth that homeless people always come from somewhere else. We often use words like transients, things like that. And while we've learned in the 4 years or so that I've been leading this survey, and it wasn't shocking to me, but pretty consistently, about 2/3 of the respondents say the last place they lived stably was here in Northwest Arkansas. These are our neighbors, our community members, things like that. So, few other questions just to help understand. Again, not shocking to me, kind of consistent with national research, but we see a gross overrepresentation of folks who experience the foster care or child welfare system during their youth. So I just like to be able to paint a richer picture of who's experiencing homelessness. And a couple of questions asking if any aspects of their identity has made it harder to receive services. Okay. Observation form. So again, for those that are unable to do it, we do have this thing. So only use it when you're unable to complete an interview with someone, and often even a partial interview is better than an observation form. So kind of feel that out as you go. But just again, use the observation form when we need to, but try to keep it to a minimum. One of the things I'm pretty proud of in the time I've been overseeing this is have really pushed down the percentage of our data that comes from observation forms, because I'll talk about it as we go further in a bit, but what I want to avoid is people just saying, I saw a person who looked kind of dirty and scary, waiting for a bus, and I'm just assuming he's homeless. Like, please don't do that. So changes and updates for those of you that have been participating in past years, the process this year is quite similar. The paper forms had very minor modifications. I removed a couple of items from the observation form that I never used, and I added a couple of items to the interview form on like smoking, tobacco use, and cessation. I did change, and I'm going to demo a couple of things in a few minutes. I did a lot of under the hood changes on the electronic survey that for the most part, you all won't see. Danny and I have spent a good chunk of time the past couple of weeks trying to break it, and identifying any issues. So the changes I made are really working pretty well. They were just designed to make the work easier for Danny and me in the afterwards with the data. But a couple changes you'll see that I'll highlight in a little bit. All right, so kind of as a step-by-step guide. So I know that the people who are doing this, generally speaking, we're recruiting volunteers for the pick count that have some experience in social service. A lot of the volunteers are current social work students, some of our recent graduates, other community members who are engaged in these types of issues. But so, I mean, some of you could give this part of the lecture just as well or better than I can. But I do know there are some people who are on the newer side. So I'm just going to go over some basic things. Just remember basic, the stuff we learned in kindergarten. Introduce yourself, approach a person, ask if you can have a few minutes of their time. Most of us aren't going out with law enforcement. We try to curtail that, for that we have some very good law enforcement partners, but there's also, when you show up with a person with a badge and a gun, can be an awkward way to start off a conversation. That can be true for anyone, and that can certainly be true for some unhoused folks. That, we have a lot of great officers in our community who are respectful, and we also have some unhoused folks have had some unfortunate experiences. So we try to keep it to a minimum. We mostly do it in Fayetteville and Springdale. We've started doing a little bit with Rogers, although I haven't got a final verification from them if they're open this year. But if you are partnering with law enforcement, most of the officers know this. Occasionally, you might need to be a little bit assertive and just kind of let the officers know that, we don't need them to, kind of like plow the ground for us and kick in doors. Sometimes officers want to secure the scene. I've encountered that happening more if the volunteer is a young woman. So, if you are partnered with an officer, it might just help to just chat for a little bit and just say, listen, our expectation is we really appreciate your support. You're going to get us to an area where there are people. And then, we appreciate you standing by just on the very unlikely event there's a concern. But, we'd like to be the ones doing the introductions and reaching out. And then I might follow that with like, if you have a real specific concern, like about a particular person, please share it with me. Please maybe be a little more involved in this instance. But generally speaking, we're going to ask you to just kind of let us do the main introductions. So if that's happy to chat about that now, if there are any questions or concerns. It can be one of the more delicate dances we do, but from years of doing this, like most things with open conversation, these things can kind of can work out pretty easily. Um, Back to the general introductions, with or without law enforcement. Don't do things that you're not comfortable with, but I would just say, it's funny when I think back on just my time working as an outreach worker years ago in Phoenix, like John, the regular community member, is not the person who's most likely to shake everyone's hand when I meet people. I certainly shake hands, but I'm not that guy that's always out there. However, when I'm meeting vulnerable people like this, I think there's just so much value in offering a hand. Just, so many people just feel shunned. There's so much stigma out there. So just those simple, basic niceties of, hi, I'm John. Nice to meet you. Can I have a few minutes of your time? And then start to explain where you're coming from. When I talk in the next sections, it's always we need to talk a little bit about some safety issues. I also don't want to exaggerate it. In all the years I've done this type of work, both when I literally did this type of work in Phoenix for, over 10 years and coordinating the count and even volunteering in other counts before I coordinated it. I've almost never had situations that I've been genuinely concerned for my safety. But the reality is, some those things, it's not a zero chance. So, do keep in mind that some of the folks we're meeting are going to be people that are dealing with active addiction, might have an or undertreated mental health condition, have significant trauma histories. So, like, whenever I'm entering a camp, and one thing I should just say back to the volunteer assignment, one of the questions I asked people is, are you comfortable going out to camp? So rest assured, if that's not within your comfort zone, that's not where you're going to be sent. You'll be in more of like a controlled day shelter or shelter. But for those of you that are going out, like whenever I enter a camp, I'll just start like, like yelling, not yelling like, but just kind of like, hello, anyone home? It might seem like a weird phrase to use, but unfortunately, it is folks home at the moment. Anyone here? Things like that. Things to avoid startling people. Things to, let people know you're coming before you're right up on them, right? Just kind of think about how you'd feel at your own home, those types of things. Maintain eye contact, kind of keep an open stance. Just be mindful of the messages our posture can send. Don't get in people's space, those types of things. Speak slowly and polite. And, apart from my comment about, raising your voice if you're entering an encampment, don't be shouting at people, those types of things. If you encounter a sleeping person, what I say here is don't wake them. And generally, I mean that. Might be a couple of times where I've spoken a little bit loudly to see if someone wants to rouse, especially if it's later in the day. But generally speaking, respect that. And that's one of the reasons that we have the observation forms. Not going to go through it, but we have the script here. Feel free to modify it a little for your own just comfort and style. But generally speaking, we ask folks to kind of use the verbiage that's here for consistency's sake and those types of things. Okay. So introducing yourself, I've probably mentioned a lot of this in passing. Say your name. mention the local organization or coalition that you're part of. I will say, for the most part, the Northwest Arkansas Continuum of Care is more of a behind the scenes nonprofit, not so much a, working with people day in, day out nonprofit. So you should certainly mention that. You can certainly mention that you are volunteering with a social work professor from the university, those types of things. Just know that the continuum of care itself might not like necessarily resonate with folks. I would maybe say something like, I'm John, I'm a volunteer with the Continuum of Care. It's an organization that it's a nonprofit that helps coordinate services for homeless folks in our community, something like that. Briefly explain the purpose of the survey, and generally it's just to conduct to gather information on the folks in our community who are experiencing homelessness. I briefly mentioned, it helps bring in federal funds and it helps us advocate and set up better systems of care here in Northwest Arkansas. So we're here because we'd like to learn more about the folks who are experiencing homelessness so we can helpfully do a better job of responding to it. Explain things that it's voluntary. Definitely that's really important. Explain that not just is the whole survey voluntary, but questions are optional. Someone can mostly want to participate in the survey, but maybe they don't want to answer my substance abuse question. Maybe they don't want to answer the HIV/AIDS question or other types of sensitive questions. That's 100% fine, those types of things. Mention that the survey is confidential. For starters, I don't have it here, we're not asking for people's names. We do ask for people's initials. And if you all are curious, or if someone you're interviewing is curious, the reason is because we use that to help avoid duplication. So sometimes, especially it's a bigger issue in South Fayetteville than in most of the region. But it's not uncommon that I'll have volunteers that someone interviewed the person at the Seven Hills Day Center in the afternoon, and then a different volunteer also encountered them at the Salvation Army shelter in the evening. And we even have volunteers going like to Genesis Church, where they offer a meal on Sundays. And so conceivably someone might encounter us 3 times. So the early question asks, have you already completed this interview? And if the answer is yes, please don't go forward. But sometimes people aren't sure, whatever the dynamic is. And so the only reason I ask for initials is just to help with that deduplication. When I'll zero in on the South Fayetteville group, or we get a lot of overlap between the Salvation Army shelter in Bentonville and the way station in Rogers. And I'll get kind of neurotic on those groups of people. And I'll look to see if I have 2 JNs that are, both 35 to 45 white men. I'll go through it closely, but I'll probably remove one of them. So if folks are asking, that's the why. Stress that the survey is confidential. It goes directly and only to our team at the university. And then when we provide data through both, we report to HUD, and when we share it locally, we're never talking about individuals. So that like hypothetical JN doesn't even exist. We just are talking about, 500 people, 40% of this sex, that type of thing. Speak slowly and with confidence. And practice your script. And this is kind of a segue. I'll talk about it a little bit more. Definitely, whether you're using the electronic version, spend some time reading through the entire survey. It's much harder to ask people questions confidently and naturally if you're as surprised by them as they are, right? So spend some time, just get familiar with it. If there's a word in there that's, some words don't come off my tongue very well, just gives you a chance to practice it, that type of thing. Some things to not start, like don't ask someone immediately, are you homeless? It should be a question pretty shortly thereafter when you start explaining we're doing this survey of homeless folks, but don't make it be the very first words out of your mouth. Don't promise anything on service connection. That's not why we're here today or on next Friday. if there are certainly people who are asking you questions that you'd like to get, that really seem like they are genuinely unaware of the available resources, you'll have phone numbers for myself and Danny and Quinn at the COC. If you're aware of services, you can certainly say, here's where you can go to Seven Hills, here's where you can go to the way station in Rogers, here's the limited options that were available that we're aware of in, other communities. But certainly, don't give people the impression that we're putting them on a housing list or anything like that. Um, don't mandate participation. Obviously, most of us, that's not even really an option, but especially for those of you that are doing these interviews in agencies that you work, just be mindful of, often like when I worked with folks, there was just a pretty significant power differential. So if you're someone's case manager, if you're a nice person who works in a food program and you provide someone a meal, they might feel like they can't say no to you. So, don't chase them off, obviously, but make sure people are hearing a time or two that this is fully optional. Um, don't panic if you fumble over some of your words. We all do it, that type of thing. Just work on speaking naturally. Um, Again, try to generally stay with our scripts, but you're also just, you're going to be 50 different humans with different styles. So, that's okay. And don't proceed until they've consented. It's just a verbal consent. We're not asking people to sign anything that would actually like be capturing more specific info on them, but just make sure they're kind of saying, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Sometimes I've gone forward with a fairly affirmative grunt, but just kind of make sure they're okay with it. Okay. I think we've probably covered this. Explain what we're doing, get their consent. Yep, yep. This is just good script stuff if you want to look at for like a little bit of an intro that you might want to play around with. So next step is then conduct the interview literally on whichever you prefer, the paper form or the electronic, and I'll get into it in a little more detail. The electronic option, it's the same electronic survey. It has kind of two different ways of doing it, one that's computer-based, one that's device-based. Go through each question. Again, remember, folks have the right to not answer. And then at the end of the survey, and it's true if it's both paper or electronic, there's a notes field. It's certainly not necessary, but if there's just something that came up, if something you were really on the fence about something, is this person meeting the criteria? It seems very fuzzy. I'd rather you enter. So if it is someone who seems very fuzzy, you can't quite tell, they're staying in a shed on their sister's property, but then they mention, but well, it's a pretty nice shed, and there's a heater in there and some of that. Just put some of those notes in there and make it my problem to sort out on the back end. Yep, and thank people for their time. One thing I'll just mention for most of you all doing these surveys, we're not offering people incentives or anything. So for mostly, it's just thank them for their time, have a nice day, and move on to the next spot. There are, for a couple of strategic reasons, we are using incentive cards in some of the rural communities that we know we've just really historically undercounted and struggled to get a good count. So if you are someone who's working with an incentive option, you are aware of that. You've been communicating with Danny and myself. You'll have been given gift cards. You'll know that deal. So at that point, you could then give the person the gift card. Again, if someone skipped some of the questions, but they grossly completed the interview, you should still give them the $10 gift card. And also for some folks doing, like, I always show up with McDonald's sandwiches, like breakfast sandwiches for the folks going out to South Fayetteville camps in the morning. Certainly give out those sandwiches, and frankly, I've given out sandwiches to people who told us to sod off. So I'm apt to feed someone. So anyway, just know that again, but for most people, there's not incentives that are even part of the package. Okay, let's see, surveying quick tips. Remember that we are speaking to vulnerable people and we are asking sensitive questions. So always lead with respect for the person and their dignity, those types of things. Everyone has the right to refuse any or all of our questions. Ask all of the questions unless, and this is another reason to get familiar with the survey. Once, like when I was a case manager and conducting interviews, once I was aware of my survey, sometimes people just tell their own survey in their own way, right? So if someone volunteered early on that they're a proud, Army veteran, instead of asking them when you get to the question, have you ever served in the military? I would just, that's a time where I would just state it. You told me you're a veteran, correct? Thank you, sir. And then I'd go forward. So another advantage of knowing that like the flow of it is you can kind of avoid some of that redundancies. Don't be making conclusions, and especially, America's having frankly a very hard time talking about identity, racial identity, gender identity lately. People have picked their polarized camps. It can be very hard. One thing that I find very helpful with these types of things is at the beginning of the interview, I'll just tell people that, I'm going to ask every question exactly as it's written. I understand that some of them are going to be kind of obvious. I just don't want to make any conclusions and make any mistakes. And 99 times out of 100, people get that and are responsive with it. Every now and again, if you ask someone what their gender is, they're going to be a little put off. It's can't you tell I'm a man, I'm a woman, that type of thing. You might get a comment about woke. So, try to head that stuff off. If you do it well, minimally a problem. But anyway, it's kind of where we are as a group of 300 million people trying to talk to one another these days. Um, be aware of body language, again, especially, and kind of engage in a bit of self-reflection. Know that, again, there are questions around substance use behavior. If that's something that, like, maybe based on your own personal experiences, histories, just personal values is maybe something that you maybe have some stigma around, just kind of like give that stuff a think and a bit of introspection. What we want to avoid is having people feeling like they're being judged or seeing funny looks on our faces, things like that. And definitely, and in the form and also the electronic version prompts you, but there is like the questions get more sensitive in the middle, and there's a prompt, and that's a good place to just kind of, again, just the next set of questions get even a little more sensitive. Just kind of want to remind people they can skip any of those types of things. And I can't remember if it's coming up or if I missed it. One really good thing, and it's just to be thinking about the sensitive nature of the questions. Be mindful of space. Ask people, like, if very often, like when I would go to say the Seven Hills Day Center, there'd be 20 people sitting in a heated tent together. And when someone would agree, I would then very much say, these questions are pretty sensitive. Do you want to step away from the group and talk, and follow their lead? I've had, very often I have people who want that level of distance and privacy. And almost just as often, someone says, "Oh, these people know all my shit," and and if they're fine with it, I'm fine with it. But make sure that it's their preferences that are driving that. And also another strategy when you get to the sensitive items, and it's easier to do if you're using the paper form. But also, if you're comfortable letting someone else touch your device, if you're doing it on a phone or a tablet, sometimes when I get to the sensitive questions I've mentioned, especially if there's other people around, if you'd like to, take the paper and the pen and circle these, if you'd like to point to the answer, just kind of like use some problem solving as seems appropriate to the context. Okay. So let's see. I think we've kind of covered much of this. Follow the same protocol, the interviews, blah, blah, blah. Fill out. Oh, so segueing into the observation. So the same initial, then moving into the observation form. So I'm going to get into the next things. So this will become clearer with the next one. So the observation form, we're just talking about where we are. The top part actually looks very, very similar to the full interview form. This information is pretty important to me. So if you're using an observation form, I'd like to know if you have prior knowledge. If you are, if you know this person, they've been coming to your soup kitchen for years, whatever the relationship is, it just increases my confidence in the accuracy of the information. We can and should still use it if we've never met the person, but just knowing, if I know that you tell me that I've been this person's case manager for a year, they were just having a really crappy day and didn't want to answer the questions, I'm going to have a very high degree of confidence in what you tell me. I want to know how certain we are that the person is experiencing homelessness. So if you are certain why, that should be things like they're staying at the shelter, those types of things. If you are, also I would put in the certain category, I was out, in a camp in the woods, that type of thing. The reasonably certain category, I might put something like, someone was flying a sign on the streets, they were panhandling, they seemed to have like 5 different bags that had a lot of their belongings. They seemed pretty reasonable. When I asked the question, they were a little vague, but kind of suggesting that they were homeless. So just give me that info because it helps me kind of sift out should we do it. And if you're just not sure, if it really is kind of, well, saw a person sitting on a bus stop and they looked kind of dirty and disheveled, were they homeless? Were they a person coming home from a manual laboring job, right? So if you're not sure, we don't want to really get into big guessing here. So just don't go forward. I want to know why you're using the observation instead of the interview, refusal, sleeping, language barrier, or if there's another with text. If you're including more than one person as a household unit in the observation form, just give me some ideas to what your thinking was, sleeping in the same tent or vehicle, etc. And here, just specify the number of people that you're putting in that unit. Okay, so for the observation form, again, especially like going back to that, do you have prior knowledge? If you have prior knowledge, you can probably, right, if you're someone's case manager, you're going to know they're 35 to 44. You're going to know their race at a pretty high degree of confidence. And also enter initials here. It says names or initials. I mean, if you want to do a first name, that's fine. But mostly, again, what I'm looking for is initials. If you're a person who doesn't know someone, go ahead and to the extent that you're confident, check off if an age group or race ethnicity. That can be kind of hard, but one thing, even if it's fuzzy, it might help me during that deduplication process. Especially you can do this on the paper version. It wouldn't work with the electronic, but if I was doing an observation on someone that's like I didn't know and they weren't sharing a lot of info and they were clearly a young adult, I might almost like mark 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 with a question mark, just kind of giving me a heads up that they're a young adult, but hard to discern 24 from 25 by eyeballing a human. So gender, again, and I've gone back and forth on the full interview form. We have a variety of with probably about 4 or 5 gender identities that people can report: male, female, transgender, non-binary. The transgender non-binary on the observation form, generally not a good place to be guessing. But again, back to that, if you are someone's case manager, you're familiar with it, you know that they do identify outside the male-female binary, then it's respectful and straightforward to report them as such. For the observation form, if there's, again, think running it through the filter of I might be trying to weed out if we've interviewed this or observed this person twice, just any big characteristics like clothing descriptions, backpack, using a wheelchair, things like that that might just be helpful for Danny and I as we sort this stuff out. All right, so gonna move to the electronic survey. It's a survey that I developed in a web-based platform called Qualtrics, a nice professional survey platform. There are two ways to use it, and we'll share some more information as we go. One is on a computer or a mobile device, but if you're going to use a mobile device, I'd frankly suggest the app that we'll talk about in a minute. But just wanna like, especially if you're working in, say they're the folks that are working at the Samaritan Center or the uh, the uh, the Genesis House out in Siloam Springs, and you have the benefit of your office computer. Just enter the URL into the computer, plug it in there. Although again, if you prefer paper, that's fine with me too. But so the computer works, but it does require that you have a stable Wi-Fi internet connection or cellular. So if you're working in a place where for any reason, like the connectivities in question, don't just build a plan entirely on using the computer. The app that we have is wonderful in that it'll capture data just fine, even if there is no connection. If you are just back in the middle of nowhere and there's no Wi-Fi and there's no cellular, you can still complete interview after interview. And when you get back on the grid, it'll then push the surveys up to us. So that's a nice advantage, both especially for folks that are doing work in more rural or off the grid areas, but also just in places where sometimes the connections aren't all that solid. So, and also if you're just a person who likes using phones, that type of thing, again, the apps, just even if you're in a place that's totally well connected, it can be a nice way to do it. So some general tips, and I'm going to walk through some other stuff a bit more. General tips on using the Qualtrics option. So no pressure, do what you prefer. But if you're on the fence, Danny and I appreciate folks taking the time to use Qualtrics just because it makes the data, it removes data entry from our plate. It also does, like I mentioned, it can make the survey flow better. We have a lot of questions that we don't ask the really personal questions of children living with their parents, right? So if there's a 15-year-old kid living, with their parents, we're not asking that 15-year-old kid or a 12-year any kid living with their folks. We're not asking them about their substance use, about, those types of things. So a nice advantage of the electronic one is once my app knows that you're interviewing a minor with their folks, you don't even see those questions. So it just lets you move through more quickly. Even if you are going to use the app, one of the electronic versions, I still encourage you to read through the questionnaire just to get comfortable with it. And also, I do still encourage you, and we'll provide some for most of the sites, but have some paper forms with you. It's just, I'm a big fan of having a plan B and a plan C. So, and also, if you're going to use it, I do encourage you to spend some time just getting familiar with the electronic version. The second question you see once you load the survey is, are you entering real data or are you just testing? So if you just let us know that you're testing it, we'll know to ignore it. And frankly, if you complete it anytime before the morning of Friday the 30th, we're also going to ignore it because we shouldn't be interviewing anything before then. So if you're using it, you can just keep entering the same app, the same survey, just refresh it. Yeah, I think that's it on the basics. Going to show a few more things. So I think I know I sent it out in the email last night. There's going to be one more, like as I mentioned, there'll be an email that's going out saying, hey, This is where we're assigning you. When those emails fly early next week, there will be like all of the key information you need. Here's the URL if you want to use the URL version. Here's, information on the app if you want to use the app version. There'll be a copy of the paper forms, all of that type of stuff. So yeah, I think most everything here kind of been covered. All right, so for the app, I'm gonna shut up in a minute and I'm gonna play a video that last year's intern Sam made. Danny and it took me a few days to get stuff squared away with the university's IT department. So Danny's going to make an updated version of this video. It'll be like a 5 minute or less video, and it's just going to have all the technical things to do on using the app just to make sure we use it correctly. One thing I want to note is you want to look for this icon. Qualtrics is a big company. They have at least 2 different apps available in the common app stores, both Apple and the other one, which I use, right? Android. You're looking for one that is going to be called Qualtrics Surveys, I believe. It used to be called Qualtrics Offline App, but it seems to be called Qualtrics Surveys now. So let me fire up this video and listen to Sam give a walkthrough. The only things that are going to be different, you see it right here. This year, you're going to see the PitCount 2026 survey. And when Sam walks you through the password, the password contains the number 2025 last year, and now it's updated 2026. And again, Danny's version will be sent out with those emails on Monday for a nice clean version of it. So.
Hello, my name is Sam, and I'm going to be...
Oh, and I just should have warned people. Sam did a great job with it, other than speaking a little quietly. So I speak kind of loudly. I'm going to shut up. You might want to raise your volume while Sam is speaking, and then lower it when John starts yelling again.
Showing you how to use the Qualtrics survey app. So, let me log out here just to get to the beginning. So, when you download the app and open it, this is what you're going to see. So the first step we have to do is log in. Now, this right here that I've just put in the username field is going to be your password. Take a moment, pause the video, do whatever you need to do, write that down. That is going to be your password to log into the app always. Alright, now that we have that written down, your username is going to be PitCountGuest. All lowercase, no spaces. So, I'm going to put our password in there, and that's going to sign us in. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is click on the settings icon, the gear icon in the top right. You're going to click on that, and you're going to see device identifier. This is going to be blank for you. We're going to put your first and last name in that field. I'm going to put my name in there, and then we're going to click Advanced Settings. Now yours is going to look like this. What we want to do is turn on Auto Upload Responses and Auto Update Surveys. And then save and exit and save the settings by clicking Close. Next, we are going to refresh the app by clicking the refresh button in the top left corner. That will refresh your app. Now, we are going to click the relevant survey. You should only see PitCount 2025. So, we're going to go ahead and click on that. We're going to click Download Survey. Now, an important thing to note is that if you log out of the app, you will have to re-download the survey. So only log out at the end of the day when you are ready to be finished. You can close the app if you need to take a break or do whatever you need to do. It will not log you out. It will only log you out if you click the log out button in the settings. So we're going to go through how to actually take the survey. So you're going to click Take Survey once you have someone that you're ready to take the survey with. Now, we're going to put our name here, because we are the volunteer. And I am just going to select some answers. Obviously, you will have real answers here. But I am just going to enter random answers. Let's see. Okay, so once you have completed a survey, it will be longer if you are completing an actual survey, but this is just a demonstration. So this will be what you see once you finish a survey. If you need to immediately start another survey with another participant, all you're going to do is click restart. That will bring you back to the beginning of the survey. You can click this X at the top to exit. So, this is an important note. When you click on this survey, you are going to see pending responses and uploaded responses. At the end of the day, these are going to upload throughout the day automatically because we turned that option on. At the end of the day, when you are ready to be done, if you still have pending responses over here, like I have, you will need to click Upload Responses. It is going to do its best to upload those responses. And now we can see we have 2 uploaded responses because I did a test earlier, and 0 pending responses. You must have 0 pending responses at the end of the day. And that is about it. So, like I mentioned earlier, only click log out at the end of the day when you are ready to be done. Otherwise, you'll have to re-download the survey, and it can be a bit annoying. You can close the app without logging out. And that is about it. If you have any questions, reach out to me or Dr. John Gallagher. I'm sure that during the day we will be providing content.
Okay, so you've been warned. Lower the volume. John's going to start yelling again. So as I mentioned, the content will be very similar. Danny's going to make an updated version though with this year's password and this year's survey, a little bit of extra information that we missed, but generally going to be quite similar. And when I send out those final emails, they'll also be, we're going to post that short 5-minute video as a standalone YouTube. So if you are installing the app and you want to refresh your memory, good news, you don't need to wade through this entire hour-plus training. You'll just find a clean 5 minutes, everything you need to do to get the app running type video out there. So let's see, getting close, a few more things. Oh, and we'll also, and I sent it out for folks who got the email yesterday. We've developed a like 1-page front and back kind of like day of the count cheat sheet, and it contains the username and the password, so you'll have that stuff there in other formats as well. There's also a QR code on the back of that handout, which it wouldn't work with the app, but it would work with a phone that it was connected to the internet in a pinch. So in a pinch, if the app isn't working, which again historically it's been rock solid, but you also could just scan the QR code on a phone and take the app. I mean, to conduct the survey using your phone if for some reason that was helpful. So yeah, this is all of the information that's in that little video. Let's see, I think most of this has been said. Can't stress this enough. Do please, please, please check at the end of your volunteering time. Make sure if there's any surveys that are pending, hit that blue button for us and send it up to us. Otherwise, it's just going to be missing data, and we're all working too hard for that. Okay, where to go? Most people, I'm going to be pretty brief here because by and large, even those of you that are going to be assigned to be doing things that are more like, outreach type things in camps and streets, they'll be a seasoned team leader, someone who's done a lot of work with the unhoused community in here in Northwest Arkansas. Someone like myself, who, although I haven't really worked here, I've A, done a lot of this work in other environments, and B, I'm very, I'm very aware of the local landscape. So you won't really be lone wolfing this. But just do think, if you're doing it, sometimes a little bit of creativity. Some of these places, parks, public benches, bus stops, obviously encampments, oftentimes looking for places around liquor stores. I don't want to overly stereotype, but there are elevated rates of substance use. And if someone has an active substance use disorder, sometimes they're looking to stay close to a, convenience store or something. 24-hour businesses, laundromats, those can be things, libraries. We have some nice partnerships going this year that I'm excited about with some of the librarians, the library staff in Madison and Carroll County. So you all are already kind of doing that naturally. Like we have the team that does Springdale in the morning will almost always swing by their library. Sometimes we do it in Fayetteville. We know folks congregate in libraries. It can also be hard. We don't want to be walking up to patrons and getting in their face and making assumptions and making everything harder. But sometimes that can be helpful. Sometimes if you are going to, if you're going to try to see what's going on in the Fayetteville library, you might want to just try introducing yourself to the library staff and just seeing if they have anyone that they know might want to talk with us. Don't force it. Librarians are, and I respect the heck out of this. They don't want people's privacy being violated. That's not good for anything. But sometimes that can help. Ask folks you see sometimes. That can be some of the most knowledgeable people are people that are out there. This is worth stating. Something we started last year that worked wonderfully, and that I'm very proud that we're going to be able to continue, is we've started partnering with some unhoused folks themselves who are working with us as volunteers. And actually, you all are just truly volunteering. If anyone promised you money, I'm sorry, we're not going to pay you. But we actually have been able to partner with the COC and give a stipend to the unhoused folks that are working with us. So if you are going out to some of the camps and things like that, there might be some of those folks that are there to share their time and their knowledge. Last year it was very transformative with me helping find places that I was not able to previously find. So let's see, we are getting close to the interview. I think we've already kind of talked about these things. Yeah. Safety, again, it's always it's important to talk about and to be mindful of. It's also important not to, impose too much stigma on it. But, always make sure you're not going out into camps alone. There's, no one is being assigned to do that alone. Keep, if not literally right with a person, know your team, keep lines of sight. When I send the emails out, I'll be doing it at a team basis. So it'll be something like, okay, these 5 people are all going to meet up at the Fayetteville Police Department substation in the morning. This person will be the team leader. I'll copy someone from Fayetteville PD so you have an agency contact. And I do the same thing for people going to shelters. Introduce yourselves, exchange cell phone numbers with your other people. Look out for each other. Again, have not had problems. I'm not particularly worried about it, but we all know the world we live in. Be smart, look out for yourselves, look out for each other. Ultimately, trust your gut. If you found a place that maybe there is someone and you just doesn't feel safe, trust your gut. You can reach out to, you'll have phone numbers for me and Danny and Quinn from the COC. If you found a place, there seem to be people, but it doesn't feel safe, reach out to us and we can try to get some other folks who can go out there, those types of things. Again, for most of you are not going out during non-daylight time. I always go out with a team of folks in the evening with Springdale PD. So if you are going out like in the evening, please bring your own flashlight or a headlamp. Headlamps are wonderful because you then have your hands free, those types of things. But think about those types of things. Be weather conscious. I'll send out updates as we get closer to it, but it does seem like as of now, and looking at Arkansas's weather 8 days out is admittedly silly. As of now, it looks like it will be dry but cold. So obviously, just consider those types of things. Just some basic things, especially, some of you are seasoned at this, but for some of you who are new, having complex feelings like when you're up close and personal with American poverty, acute homelessness, that can be, you can have you can certainly have a strong emotional reaction to that. Give yourself some time and some grace, process those things. If you want to reach out to us afterwards and just kick some things around, don't hesitate to do that. Again, no one's going to be working alone. Talk to the people you're doing this with. So know those types of things. Again, think about the purpose of it. We're not trying to fix people's homelessness directly on a day. We're really trying to better understand the needs to work on a system level. So keep those types of things in mind, and just treat people with respect. So I think there's one thing I want to show just on the other survey, but I want to let's see, final logistics. If you haven't completed the volunteer survey and you somehow found yourself in this webinar, please do complete the survey. It went out in the email. It'll just help us know that you exist and where to assign you. We'll be emailing everyone, hopefully Monday, maybe Tuesday at the latest, with those specific details. We encourage everyone to practice. We'll have, again, apart from like the more rural communities that we're asking people to do their own printing at this point logistically. If I'm asking you to go to the Salvation Army shelter or the Seven Hills Day Center or go out with cops somewhere, you don't need to bring paper copies. I'll have a number of them at all the sites, or Danny and I will have a number of them at all the sites. So again, you might want to print one for your own, just getting used to it. You might want to print that one-page handout, although we'll have those there as well. I'll have some pens with us, but if you can, especially if you want to use paper, if you can bring a few pens for yourself, that's just good and smart. If you're aging like me, you probably know it, bring your readers. If when you get to the site, introduce yourself to, again, every email will say, hey, this is the manager of the shelter. Just introduce yourself, let them know, close the loop with them, those types of things. And contact info, you should be having it all over the place for me, Danny, and Quinn. And before questions, I just want to show one last thing, partially because for those of you who've done it before, it's going to be new, and partially because one aspect of it's maybe not fully intuitive. So a couple of the changes I made with the survey this year changed up a couple things. So this is a screen that if you're using it online or the app, everyone's going to see. So a couple of slides earlier, I let the system know that there were 2 people in this household. Could have been 1, could have been 7. This is not a place to enter. So you're going to get to a point where the system's just going to say, hey, you're doing 2 people. It's just basically the way the programming worked. All you have to do is hit the button to move forward. You don't need to enter. You don't need to overwrite. You probably can't, actually. So just know that you're going to see this. You just need to advance to go forward. I did some nice programming that makes some things easier, but this one thing made it a little maybe less intuitive. If the household has 1 person, or if it's a multi-household person, but for the first person, the only relationship is self or same, or I don't use the term, but basically head of household. So just you need to check it, but it's the only option. In contrast, the second through the 10th time you're entering information, you will no longer see self because it was the first person, and you will now see all of the other options. So just if something looks a little different, like, hey, I only had one option and now I have 6 options, know that's by design. So I'm going to keep the recording going, but I'm going to turn off the screen share and happy to answer any questions that folks may have. Any questions? And it's fine if not.
Uh, I had put this in the chat with Danny. I don't know if it applies to everyone, but I'm from the Berryville Library.
Okay.
So I know that we're giving out the incentives, but I haven't seen them. So I was just wondering the logistics of that.
Danny, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm planning on purchasing them tonight and getting them in the mail tomorrow before the storm. They should arrive with the storm probably Tuesday, Wednesday, which is a few days before the count. Um, as to who gets them, it says Berryville. Um, I have Susie getting them, and I think if I have your address, I could send them directly to you. If I don't have your address, I'll have either Susie or there was someone else in Berryville that I might be sending it to. I have to,
Well,
can't,
I'm Julie from the library.
uh-huh.
I'll just email you my address, the library address. Because if you send it to us directly, it will just save Susie from trying to get it to Berryville, which may or may not happen.
Sure, yes. Yeah, if you send me your address, I'll send it from directly to there on Friday.
Okay, thank you so much.
That'd be perfect. And just a note for you, Julie, and for anyone else that is does have the incentive cards. Thankfully, these incentive cards came from the Continuum of Care nonprofit with some donations. They did not come from university, which the university procurement would drive us all crazy. So you don't need to ask people to sign for them. Just give them out to someone who completed. And if you end up with some extras, I mean, you can send them back to us and we'll eventually find their way to a person in need. We're also comfortable. You can put them in your drawer, and if in a month you have a patron that's, that it comes up in passing that they have acute need and you're comfortable doing it, feel free to just give it to a good person, or if there's a food program in your community, give it to them. Just bottom line is, we don't need to jump through hoops getting them back to us or accounting them. Just, get them to a person in need, and that's perfectly kosher.
Also, I have you down for a Walmart gift card. Let me know if there's a different type or a Sonnet, let me know if Walmart is okay.
Walmart is great for us.
Okay.
And this is another just kind of logistical question for the library setting. What I was thinking, we're having several of the librarians trained, but for the days that we can collect, we have put up the information you sent. So it has like, what is the pick count? Kind of, we have those flyers up. I was thinking of having just like have us have like a name tag on that just says, I'm not exactly sure, something about, do you want to be counted? You can talk to me or something. Just like have it worn on us so people know who to come to. Does that sound like a good idea or a bad idea?
Sounds great to me. I mean, especially you. I mean, A, it just genuinely sounds great, and B, I mean, you know your place and you're a consumer. So yeah, I think that sounds smart. Oh, and also, Julie, you may be aware, and just I don't know that I mentioned it on the front end. We like the bulk of the counting does occur on Friday, July 30th. we are allowed to conduct this counting through the following Thursday. So, hey, like don't if your level of commitment is going to be narrower, understand, and we appreciate anything. But for what it's worth, we can conduct this count through the following Thursday with the important caveat of if the person was homeless on the night of the 29th into the 30th. So just know that's an option as well for folks.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, any other questions from anyone? Well, thank you for those who are in attendance. Thank you for those who will be watching later. When I took down last year's training video from YouTube, I was heartened to see that about 50 people watched the recording last year. So I know it does, even though we have a small room tonight, I know people do watch it. I greatly appreciate really the work you all do day in, day out. I appreciate you taking on a little bit of extra responsibility to help us with this task. Don't hesitate to reach out to, especially if it's pick count stuff, me and Danny, Quinn from the COC, really no wrong door. If it's larger homeless system stuff, Quinn's the best person, but we all communicate amongst ourselves. And unless someone has anything else, my last thing is, hope everyone stays warm, stays safe, and even maybe enjoys the winter a little bit. It's going to be wicked, but I also, I grew up in the upper Northeast and I like some winter. So stay safe and enjoy, everyone. Any other final questions?
Julie, I might need to also give me an estimate of how many in Berryville, how many gift cards, like 5, 10, something.
Will do.
And John, if I can chat with you after.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, last call for questions. Otherwise, I'm going to turn off the recording and wish everyone safe evening. And Danny and I will chat for a minute. All right, let me get this recording stopped.